In Africa today, the richest 1% owns more wealth than over 50% of the continent's population combined. But what happens when the richest African king decides to give his most beautiful daughter away to a man who has nothing, or so he thought? Could a poor man truly win the heart of royalty? Or was he never poor at all? The sun over Oduduwa Kingdom rose like molten gold, spilling its light across a land that glittered with power, heritage, and unimaginable wealth. Here, wealth wasn't whispered about. It was seen. The air itself seemed to hum with prosperity, from the ivory gates that guarded the royal palace to the golden rooftops that shone even brighter at midday. At the heart of this kingdom stood a palace that legends had tried and failed to fully describe. A palace said to be the largest royal residence in Africa. It stretched over 100 hectares of land, a sprawling empire within an empire. Towering baobab trees lined the outer courtyards like ancient sentinels, their roots twisted deep into the red earth of Oduduwa, their branches sheltering the songs of birds that had made the palace their home for generations. The palace walls were more than just walls. They were stories carved in stone, etched with sacred symbols of the Yoruba ancestors. Warriors, kings, queens, gods, and hunters stood frozen in those carvings, telling the story of a kingdom that had never known defeat, a dynasty that had thrived for over 5 centuries. Inside those mighty walls sat the throne room, a breathtaking hall where the air smelled faintly of frankincense and burning sandalwood, and shafts of sunlight filtered through tall stained glass windows. At the center, on a raised marble platform, rested a throne forged entirely from pure gold, its legs shaped like roaring lions, its armrests embedded with emeralds and sapphires from distant lands. It had been a gift from foreign dignitaries, a symbol of reverence and power. Few in the world sat on a seat as heavy, as old, and as priceless as that throne. And upon that golden throne sat the man they called Kabiyesi Adekunle Oladipo I, the richest African king of his generation. King Adekunle Oladipo was 62 years old, but he carried himself with the commanding presence of a man who had never once bowed his head to anyone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dignified, the kind of man whose very footsteps carried authority. His beard was long and silver, like a river of moonlight flowing down his strong jaw, his skin a shade of burnished bronze that glimmered beneath the palace lights. His agbada, a wide flowing robe, shimmered with golden embroidery. It was hand-woven in Kano, spun with threads imported from Morocco. Each fold told a story of wealth and power, and upon his head sat the ancestral crown, a heavy beaded crown handed down for over 3 centuries. It was said that no matter the weight, only a true king could wear it without faltering. When King Adekunle spoke, the entire hall stilled. Courtiers froze mid-breath. Drummers set down their sticks. Chiefs leaned forward. His voice wasn't merely sound, it was command. But for all his gold, his lands, his fleets of oil tankers and diamond mines, for all the foreign presidents and CEOs who bowed before him, there was one thing that he held more precious than every treasure in his vault: his only daughter, Princess Abeni Adekunle. At 25, she had become the most sought-after princess in Africa. She was the crown jewel of Oduduwa Kingdom, the one woman whose beauty and grace had caused wars of pride between nations. Her beauty wasn't loud, it was quiet, the kind that made drummers pause mid-beat, the kind that turned kings into poets. Her skin was smooth and dark like polished onyx, glowing beneath the sun with a regal sheen. Her almond-shaped eyes held the calm mystery of moonlight reflecting on water. Her lips were full, always curved into a soft, knowing smile that disarmed even the proudest men. Her hair, thick and long, was often braided in intricate patterns and crowned with coral beads that jingled softly as she walked. Her posture was poised, every movement laced with the quiet strength of a woman raised to rule beside greatness. She wore royal wrappers of deep wine, red and gold, but it wasn't the clothes that made her royal. It was the way she carried herself, as though she belonged to the stars themselves. Yet, beyond the silks and songs, UDEMY was more than a princess. She was a woman who thought deeply, who questioned, who longed for something real. The world had long set its eyes on her. From Accra to Johannesburg, from Dubai to London, men of unimaginable wealth sent their messengers and their gifts to Oduduwa Palace, hoping to win her hand. Chests of gold arrived at the palace gates. Convoys of luxury cars lined the palace courtyard. Diamonds, oil contracts, entire estates. Everything a woman could want was laid at her feet. One prince from Ghana even built a golden statue of her in the middle of his capital city. A billionaire from Dubai sent a necklace worth $30 million. A young British royal wrote her poems on silk, signed with his family crest. But none of it touched her heart. She would sit at the palace balcony in the late evenings, watching the sun set behind the baobab trees, her soft fingers playing with the coral beads on her hair. Her maid, Sewa, a petite and lively woman, would often tease her. "My princess," Sewa would say with a grin, "if it were me, I would have said yes to that Ghanaian prince the moment I saw the gold. My legs would be in Accra already." UDEMY would laugh softly, shaking her head. "Sewa," she'd reply, "I don't want a man who loves the princess. I want a man who loves me." It was a quiet rebellion, but a dangerous one in a world where royal marriages weren't about love. They were about power, alliances, wealth, legacy. The palace council grew restless. Suitors came and went like the harmattan wind, leaving behind riches but taking nothing with them. For King Adekunle, it was a matter of honor. His daughter, the only heir to the Oduduwa royal throne, could not marry just anyone. She needed to marry someone of equal wealth and influence, someone who could preserve the royal legacy. One warm evening, the king summoned his chiefs, elders, and trusted advisers into the royal council chamber. It was a grand circular hall with lion-head pillars and ancient lamps that flickered with orange light. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense. The elders wore their agbadas and fila caps, their faces wrinkled with both wisdom and expectation. King Adekunle rose from his golden chair, his robe trailing behind him like a river of light. "I have given the suitors time," he began, his voice deep, filling the chamber. "I have waited for my daughter to choose wisely. But time is moving, and the kingdom needs a prince, a man who can match the throne she will inherit." A low murmur rippled through the council. Chief Oho, the oldest of the elders, cleared his throat. "Kabiyesi, the world is watching Oduduwa. A marriage alliance could make this kingdom untouchable. Imagine the strength if we join with Dubai or the British royals." Chief Balogun, the war chief, slammed his fist on the table. No daughter of Oduduwa should be allowed to turn away men of such wealth. "Kabiyesi, we must guide her hand if she will not choose wisely." King Adekunle nodded slowly, his face carved in stone. He loved UDEMY more than the council could understand, but he also bore the weight of a throne that was older than any one man. "She is my heart," he said softly, "but she is also Oduduwa's future. My daughter must marry a man of equal wealth and power." Nothing less. His words hung in the air like a decree written in iron. That night, Princess UDEMY sat alone in her chambers, the sounds of distant drums echoing faintly through the palace walls. She leaned on the balcony rail, the cool breeze brushing against her face. The sky was a black velvet cloth sprinkled with 1,000,000 stars. From this height, she could see the lights of the kingdom flickering like fireflies. She could also hear, faintly, the laughter from the marketplace far below the palace hill. Laughter that was loud, unrestrained, real. She placed a hand over her chest and whispered, "Will anyone ever love me without seeing the crown on my head?" Sewa stepped in quietly, carrying a shawl to drape over her shoulders. "My princess, your heart is too soft for this world," she said gently. "Men don't look beyond gold." UDEMY's lips curved into a sad smile. "Then perhaps, one day, someone will." The next morning, the palace bustled with activity. Another convoy of foreign guests had arrived, their cars sleek, their guards armed, their pockets heavy with riches. Suitors had become routine in Oduduwa. The guards hardly blinked anymore. But what the king didn't know, what even UDEMY couldn't imagine, was that destiny had already begun to move quietly, like a drumbeat in the distance, somewhere beyond the palace walls. In the dusty corners of Oja Market, a man with nothing but kind eyes and calloused hands was living a life no one in the palace cared to notice. And one day soon, the path of a princess and that man would cross in a way that would change the story of Oduduwa forever. For now, however, the golden palace stood as it always had, proud, untouchable, and blind to the wind that was about to blow. King Adekunle tightened his grip on the throne's armrest as he looked upon the gathered emissaries and foreign princes that day. He did not know that the man who would one day win his daughter's heart was not in the convoy, not in a suit, not holding diamonds. He was somewhere in the crowd below, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but destined. Little did the king know fate was not written in gold, but in the quiet corners of life. And love was about to humble the wealthiest throne in Africa. The road to the outskirts of Oduduwa Kingdom was a path few royals had ever walked. It began where the tarred roads ended, and the golden palace walls disappeared behind a curtain of palm trees and dust. Here there were no gold-plated gates or marble fountains. There were only the quiet songs of crickets, the rustle of the wind through banana leaves, and the smell of roasted corn that drifted through the market air like a warm embrace. This was Oja Market, the living heart of the kingdom. It was where real life happened. Women, wrapped in colorful ankara, bustled about with baskets balanced on their heads, shouting prices in sing-song Yoruba tones. Men pushed wooden wheelbarrows loaded with yams, tomatoes, and smoked fish. The air was always alive with sound, babies crying, hawkers chanting, and the occasional radio playing Fuji music from a corner shop. And there, amid the noise and dust and laughter, lived Tunde Alabi. Tunde was a man who moved through life quietly, like the evening breeze that rustled through palm fronds. At 29, he was known across Oja Market by one name, the Pauper of Oya. It wasn't meant to mock him entirely. It was simply what people called him, because He owned nothing grand, wore nothing expensive, and walked barefoot sometimes when his sandals wore thin. He lived in a small mud house with a rusted zinc roof that leaked during the rainy season. His bed was a bamboo mat. His wardrobe consisted of 3 native outfits, one clean, one torn, and one somewhere in between. But Tunda was never ashamed. He was tall and lean, his warm chocolate-brown skin glistening whenever the sun hit him. His cheekbones were sharp, his jaw strong, and his eyes, deep brown, carried the kind of quiet strength that no one could ignore. He had the look of a man who'd walked through storms, but still smiled at the rainbow. Every morning, he pushed open the wooden door of his little workshop in the market, a small stall squeezed between Mama Funka's Akara stand and a tailor's shop. A hand-painted sign above the stall read in uneven letters, "Tunde Electric. We fix radios, generators, and fans." God is able. Tunde wasn't a man of riches, but he had a gift in his hands. With a few wires and a screwdriver, he could bring a broken machine back to life. Old men brought their radios to him. Mothers brought their fans. Bus drivers brought their generators. And Tunde fixed them all with quiet patience and a shy smile. Every evening, when the market began to slow down, Tunde would sit at the edge of the road with a roasted corn in one hand and palm wine in the other, watching the sun melt into the horizon. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was his. Simple, peaceful, and real. Meanwhile, across the hills in the Golden Palace, Princess Ebeni's life couldn't have been more different. Every move she made was watched. Every step was measured. Her days were planned like royal processions, her laughter muffled by palace expectations. She was loved, yes, adored even, but she wasn't free. Ebeni often stood by her window at night, looking down at the glittering lights of Oja Market in the distance. She didn't know what freedom tasted like, but she imagined it tasted like roasted corn with salt and smelled like red earth after the rain. She craved the feeling of being ordinary just for one day, to walk where no one bowed, to speak where no one whispered her title, to be a woman, not a princess. And so, one evening, with Sewa by her side, she decided to do something unthinkable. "My princess," Sewa whispered nervously as Ebeni tied a plain wrapper around her waist and covered her hair with a scarf. "If the guards catch us—" "They won't," Ebeni interrupted with a mischievous smile. "Tonight, I'm not the princess. Tonight, I'm just Ebeni." They slipped through a side gate after sunset, blending into the shadows as the sound of talking drums echoed faintly from the palace courtyard. No one noticed 2 village girls walking down the dusty road toward the market. Oja Market at night was different. Lanterns swung from bamboo poles. Fires crackled at food stalls. Children ran barefoot, chasing one another between stalls. The smell of suya peppered the air, mingling with the sweetness of roasted plantain and ground nut. For the first time in her life, Ebeni's laughter was not restrained. She walked freely among the crowd, her coral beads hidden beneath the scarf, her soft feet feeling the earth beneath them. She and Sewa bought roasted corn, drank cold sachet water, and listened to a local Fuji singer belting out love songs by the corner of a bar. Ebeni's eyes sparkled in the dim lantern light. She felt alive, and that was the night she met Tunde Alabi. He saw her before she saw him. Tunde had just finished fixing a faulty radio for an old trader and was packing up his tools when he noticed a girl struggling to lift a basket of yams by the roadside. Her wrapper was a little too clean for a market girl, but her hands were firm, her eyes bright. Without a second thought, he walked over. "You shouldn't carry that alone," he said, his voice soft, almost shy. She looked up, a little startled. She wasn't used to strangers speaking to her so casually. But his eyes were kind, not calculating, not the eyes of a man trying to impress a princess, just a man trying to help. "And you shouldn't be so kind to strangers," she replied with a teasing smile testing him. He laughed lightly, the sound warm and disarming. "Then maybe I'll be kind just this once." And so he took the basket from her and carried it to the vendor's stand. Sewa watched from a distance, hiding her grin behind her hand. Abeni hadn't smiled at any prince like that. They talked that night as if they'd known each other for years. Tunda asked simple questions: where she lived, what she liked, whether she preferred roasted corn or fried plantain. She answered carefully, hiding the truth, but laughing more than she had in weeks. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as Princess Abeni, daughter of King Adekunle, heir to Oduduwa's throne, but as Abeni, just Abeni. From that night on, their paths crossed again and again, sometimes by chance, sometimes because Abeni made sure of it. She and Sewa would sneak out in the evenings, blending into the market crowd like two ordinary girls. She always wore her plain wrapper, a faded scarf tied over her braids, and soft slippers that never once touched the palace marble. And there, under the flickering lanterns of Oja Market, Tunda would be, sitting on his wooden stool, wiping grease from his hands after fixing someone's generator, his laugh ringing out like a melody. "Back again," he would ask, feigning surprise. "I like roasted corn," she'd reply with a shrug. "Or maybe," he'd tease, "you just like talking to me." Their friendship grew quietly, like yams sprouting in the soil, unseen at first, but strong and sure beneath the surface. They shared small things: laughter, roasted corn, stories of childhood. She told him she was from a small village near the palace, a lie she told only because she feared the truth would shatter everything. Tunde told her about his parents, how they died when he was young, leaving him to learn how to fix things to survive. He spoke with no bitterness, only strength. His voice carried the weight of a man who had endured life but refused to let it break him. She admired him, his humility, his courage, his quiet dignity. She saw in him a freedom she had never known. And Tunde? He was captivated by her, not just by her beauty, though she glowed even in plain clothes. He loved the way she listened, the way she laughed, the way she didn't look down on him like so many others did. She was different, but their love lived in the shadows. Abeni knew it was forbidden. A princess could not love a man who owned nothing but a toolbox and a smile. Oduduwa's royal blood was meant to mix with royal blood, and yet her heart kept leading her back to him. Sewa worried. Every night they sneaked out, she'd whisper, "My princess, what if someone sees us? What if the palace guards find out?" Abeni would touch her friend's hand and whisper, "Let me have this, Sewa. Just this. Just one part of my life that belongs to me." The people in the market began to notice too. Some gossiped in whispers, others smiled. The pauper of Oja, walking with the mysterious girl who dressed too neatly to be poor. Some said they were in love. Others said it would end in heartbreak. But neither Tunde nor Abeni cared. One rainy evening, when the clouds rolled low and thunder growled softly in the distance, they found shelter under an old mango tree by the edge of the market. Rain drummed on the roof of the stalls, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. She shivered slightly. He took off his thin jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders without hesitation. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, looking at him, really looking this time. "Because," he said, eyes soft, "you look like someone who deserves kindness." Her heart clenched. No one, not even the princes with their gold and diamonds, had ever spoken to her that way. That night, as they stood beneath the tree, something shifted. Something quiet and unspoken, like a seed pushing through the soil to meet the light. UDEMY realized she wasn't just curious about this man anymore, she was falling in love. But love in Oduduwa was never simple, not when royalty was involved. Every night she returned to the palace, her heart fuller, but her fear heavier. What would her father say if he found out? What would the council do? A princess fallen for a pauper. It was a scandal the kingdom would never allow. Still, she couldn't stop herself. Neither could Tunde. For both of them, the market became more than a place of trade. It became a world between worlds, a place where titles didn't matter, where gold held no weight, where two hearts could meet like equals. They didn't know it then, but this love, this quiet, forbidden love, would one day shake the throne itself. In the quiet corners of Oja Market, love was growing where no one expected it, not in a golden palace, but in the dust and sweat of ordinary life. It was a love that ignored class, ignored rules, and it was only a matter of time before the world noticed. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the kingdom of Oduduwa, but inside the royal palace, dark clouds of fury gathered. The drummers were silent, the servants whispered cautiously, and even the birds that usually sang around the palace walls seemed to sense the coming storm. King Adekunle Oladipo sat on his golden throne, his jaw tight, fingers drumming against the lion-headed armrest. His crown tilted slightly, as if even it trembled under the weight of his anger. In his hand was a folded note, a love letter, written in delicate handwriting. It was signed, "Yours, UDEMY," and beneath it, "To Tunde." The king slammed the letter on the floor. "Summon her!" he barked. The guards moved like wind, hurrying down the corridors to the princess's chamber. Princess UDEMY entered moments later, wearing a simple cream wrapper, her long braids tied up with coral beads. She tried to stand tall, but she could feel the rage in her father's eyes like a lion ready to pounce. "UDEMY!" The king's voice was deep and dangerous. "Do you care to explain why the daughter of the wealthiest king in Africa is writing love letters to a pauper?" Her throat tightened. "Father!" "Do not father me," he thundered. His staff struck the marble floor. "You dare to shame this throne?" Her knees buckled. She knelt before him. "He is not what you think. He is kind, he is honest, and he is poor?" His words sliced the air like a blade. The queen, sitting quietly on a smaller throne to his right, placed a trembling hand on her lap. Queen Yetunde, age 58, was graceful, elegant, and wise, a woman with the calmness of the ocean, but eyes that saw everything. "UDEMY," she said gently, "you know what marrying outside royal expectations would mean." "I know," UDEMY whispered, "but I also know that my heart does not understand gold or diamonds. It understands love, and I love him." The king rose from his throne, his tall frame towering like an iroko tree. "You will not marry him," he declared, "not in my lifetime." But Princess UDEMY did not cry this time. She lifted her head. "Then you will have to fight against my heart." The court gasped. No one had ever spoken to the king that way. By noon, the king had made his decision. "Bring Tunda Alibi to the palace," he ordered. "If he wants to play with fire, let him burn." Word spread through the kingdom like wild Harmattan fire. The pauper is being summoned. Tunde Alibi arrived that evening. He wore his cleanest brown native attire, though it was still simple compared to the silk and gold of the palace. His sandals were dusty from the road, but his back was straight. He walked into the grand hall as hundreds of courtiers whispered and laughed behind their hands. King Adekunle's golden robe shimmered beneath the chandeliers as he leaned back on his throne. "So, this is the man who thinks he can steal a princess from her kingdom," the king said coldly. Tunde bowed respectfully. "I came because I love her, not to steal." The courtiers snickered. One of the chiefs leaned to another and whispered, "Look at him, poor as palm wine in a cracked calabash." The king gestured. A guard stepped forward with a large leather bag filled with gold coins. It glittered beneath the torchlights. "Here," the king said, his voice echoing through the hall. "This is more than you could ever earn in your lifetime. Take it and disappear from my daughter's life forever." A silence fell. Tunde stared at the gold. Anyone else would have fallen to their knees, but he lifted his gaze to the king and said softly, "Your Majesty, I don't want your gold. I only want your daughter's hand if she chooses me." Gasps rippled through the hall. The king slammed his staff on the floor. "You dare to reject my gold?" "I dare to love her honestly," Tunde replied. The courtiers laughed louder. Some called him mad. Others called him foolish. "You are nothing," one of the chiefs spat. "You live in the dust of the kingdom. How can a broom marry a crown?" Tunde's eyes hardened, but he stayed calm. "A broom may sweep the dust, but even a crown needs the ground to stand." The queen's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. She saw something the others did not. Just as the tension reached its peak, the sound of car engines rumbled through the palace gates. It was unusual. Foreign cars, black convoys with tinted windows, and diplomatic flags. Guards rushed to the entrance. Within minutes, the royal announcer's voice boomed through the hall. "His Highness, the Emir of Kano." "The President of Orison Oil Company." The court fell silent. These were not ordinary guests. They were some of the most powerful men in Africa. The king's brows furrowed. What are they doing here at this hour? The grand doors opened, and in walked two men, Emir Usman Kano, dressed in flowing white robes, and Chief Olumide Adegoke, the billionaire president of one of Africa's largest oil companies. To everyone's shock, they didn't walk toward the king first. They walked straight to Tunde, and then, before the entire royal court, they bowed slightly. "Alhaji Tunde Alibi," Chief Olumide said with deep respect, "we have been searching for you. The board meeting in Abuja has been delayed because you were not present." Gasps, whispers, eyes widened like calabash lids. King Adekunle rose from his throne. "Board meeting? Abuja? What is the meaning of this?" The emir turned to him, smiling politely. "Your Majesty, it seems you do not know who this young man truly is. Tunde Alibi is the sole heir to Alibi International Holdings, one of the wealthiest private conglomerates in West Africa. His late father built a fortune in oil, real estate, telecommunications, and agriculture. He disappeared from the public eye after refusing to inherit the empire immediately." The queen covered her mouth in shock. The king's grip on his staff loosened. Tunde's voice was calm. "Your Majesty, I didn't come to your palace with titles or wealth. I wanted UDEMY to love me for who I am, not for what the world thinks I'm worth. The entire room fell silent. The same chiefs who mocked him earlier now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their laughter had turned to disbelief. The man they called Pauper was richer than most of the dignitaries in the room combined. Princess UDEMY stepped forward from behind the curtains where she had been listening, her heart pounding in her chest. She wore a simple blue buba and iro, not the royal attire of gold and beads. She walked toward Tunde slowly, her eyes glistening. "You," she whispered, "all this time, you were—" He held her gaze gently. "I was always Tunde." That never changed. Her lips parted, emotions swirling like the harmattan wind. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to know if what we had was real," he said softly. "I've seen people bow because of money. But I wanted to see someone look at me and see me." Her tears fell, but they were not of pain. They were of love and pride. The king staggered back onto his throne, struggling to process what had just unfolded. "All this time," he murmured, "you were richer than the men who begged for her hand." "Richer is a matter of gold," Tunde replied, "but love is not weighed on a scale of gold. If she never loved me as a poor man, then she wouldn't deserve me as a rich one." The queen rose gracefully and placed a hand on the king's shoulder. "My king," she said gently, "our ancestors taught us that true power is not always worn in crowns. Sometimes it hides in plain clothes." The court was now silent. No more mockery, no more laughter. One of the chiefs, the loudest mocker earlier, stammered as he bowed deeply to Tunde. "Forgive us, Alhaji Tunde." Tunde simply nodded, humble as ever. The king lifted his eyes to his daughter, his only child, the light of his heart. She stood beside Tunde, not behind him, and for the first time King Adekunle saw not a reckless girl in love, but a woman standing by a man who had proved the worth of his soul. He rose slowly and walked toward them. The hall held its breath. "Son," he said, his voice low but steady, "you have shown me something greater than gold. You have shown me character." He turned to UDEMY, his eyes softening. "And you have shown me what it means to love without condition." UDEMY's heart swelled. The king faced Tunde again. "If she still chooses you, then I will give my blessing." "I already chose him, father," UDEMY said firmly, her voice ringing with strength. The courtiers bowed their heads. The king sighed deeply and stretched out his hand. Tunde knelt and took it respectfully. "Then from today," King Adekunle declared, "the man once called the pauper of Oja Market shall be known as the future husband of Princess UDEMY Adekunle." The hall erupted in cheers and chants. Drummers struck their talking drums, their beats echoing through the palace walls. The chiefs sang praises. Even the sky seemed to brighten, as if the gods themselves smiled upon the union. That night, when the guests had left and the noise faded, Tunde and UDEMY stood on the palace balcony, the moon casting a silver glow over their faces. "You changed my world," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No, you saw me before the world did." They held hands, not as a princess and a billionaire, but as two souls who had found each other beyond the boundaries of wealth and status. And down below, the golden palace that had once felt like a prison for her now glimmered like a promise that love could rewrite destiny, a promise that a pauper could be a king in disguise, a promise that the richest treasures were not always made of gold. The morning of the royal wedding arrived with a sky so blue it seemed the heavens themselves had polished it for the occasion. From the edges of the kingdom of Oduduwa to the distant riverbanks where the fishermen cast their nets, every heart beat to the same rhythm. The princess is getting married. Trumpets echoed from the palace towers at dawn. Drummers took their positions by the massive golden gates, their talking drums booming with coded messages of joy. In the market square, women tied their jeels higher, men adjusted their agbadas proudly, and children danced barefoot the dust, their laughter rising like incense to the gods. For weeks, the wedding had been the only topic on every tongue. But this wasn't just any wedding. It was the marriage of Princess Abeni Adekunle, the only daughter of the richest king in Africa, to the man the people once called the pauper of Oja Market, but who had turned out to be one of the most powerful men in the continent. This was not just a wedding, it was a rewriting of history. The palace grounds were transformed into a spectacle of colors. Hundreds of workers had spent days hanging silk banners in gold and white, the royal colors of Oduduwa. Garlands of fresh flowers lined the walkway to the throne pavilion, and hundreds of brass lanterns hung from carved palm trunks, waiting to light the night sky. Royal delegations from across Africa began to arrive early. The Emir of Kano, in his white flowing robes, flanked by guards carrying spears tipped with gold. A delegation from the Ashanti kingdom, draped in rich kente cloth. Queens from Lesotho and Botswana. Billionaires from Dubai and London, who once hoped to be the princess's in-laws, now came simply to watch. The drummer's rhythm deepened as each royal guest stepped onto the palace grounds, their feet moving in sync with the beat. The air smelled of roasted goat meat, jollof rice, palm wine, and sweet flowers. The golden throne had been moved to the central courtyard, a symbol that this day belonged not to politics or wealth, but to love. Inside the bridal chamber, Princess Abeni stood before a tall mirror carved from ancient Iroko wood. Her gown shimmered, a white aso-oke gown intricately threaded with gold. It hugged her slender waist, flared gently at the hips, and trailed behind like a flowing river of light. Coral beads layered her neck, and golden earrings shaped like the Oduduwa crest dangled from her ears. Her braids were neatly woven into a royal crown, decorated with more coral beads and golden pins. But it wasn't the gold or the silk that made her beautiful that day. It was the serenity in her eyes, the same eyes that once gazed out from behind palace walls, longing for freedom, now shone with certainty. Sewa, her loyal maid, adjusted the coral beads on her arm. "My princess," she whispered, unable to hide her smile, "today the gods will dance with us." Abeni chuckled softly. "I'm not sure if the gods dance, Sewa." "Oh, they will," Sewa said proudly. "Even Ogun must be smiling. Who would have thought a market boy would become the son-in-law of the mighty King Adekunle?" Abeni touched her hand gently. He was never just a market boy. I saw him before the world did. She turned back to the mirror, took a deep breath, and whispered a quiet prayer. Not to be a perfect queen, not to live in gold, but to love and be loved, deeply and without fear. Meanwhile, in the groom's chamber, Tunde Alabi stood surrounded by men who now called him Your Excellency. But he still felt like the man who fixed radios and carried baskets for strangers. His agbada was a deep royal cream with gold embroidery, hand-woven by the best tailors in Aso-Oke. A golden cap sat neatly on his head, and a red coral bead necklace rested on his chest. But even beneath all the splendor, his calm eyes were the same ones that once looked at Abeni across a dusty market stall. His best friend, Dapo, who had worked with him at Oja Market, adjusted his agbada and whistled. Kai, Tunde, who would have believed this? One day we're fixing broken generators. Today you're marrying a princess. Oduduwa will not rest today. Tunde laughed. I never fixed generators to win a princess. I only wanted to live freely. Dapo grinned. And you did. But look at you now. The whole continent is watching. Tunde sighed lightly. I don't want them to see a billionaire or a royal groom. I just want a Bani to see me, the same man who once handed her roasted corn and asked about her day. The royal wedding procession began in the late afternoon. Drummers beat their talking drums louder, their rhythm echoing beyond the palace walls. The ground seemed to pulse with their music. The king and queen walked out first, dressed in royal regalia. King Adekunle's golden agbada shimmered in the sunlight. The once proud, unbending ruler now carried a softer expression. He had learned that day when Tunde refused the gold that wealth does not make a man worthy. Character does. Guests rose as the bride walked out. Abeni emerged from the palace with slow, graceful steps, escorted by 12 royal maidens in cream wrappers. Her face was veiled with fine lace, through which her almond-shaped eyes gleamed like starlight. The drummers shifted their beat into a slow, steady rhythm, the heartbeat of Oduduwa. When Tunde stepped forward to meet her, the air changed. Even the breeze seemed to pause to watch. Their eyes met through the veil, and Abeni smiled. In that brief moment, it didn't matter who watched. The world disappeared, leaving only two people, a princess and a man who once carried baskets in the market. The wedding rites followed the ancient traditions of the kingdom. The palace priests, dressed in white wrappers and holding cowries, recited blessings that had been spoken for centuries. A pot of palm wine was brought forward, decorated with beads. Tunde took a sip, then handed it to Abeni, who lifted the calabash to her lips. The crowd erupted in cheers. The sharing of the wine was the seal of love. Next came the Ijoko Eye, the seating of the couple on the royal stool. As they sat side by side on a carved stool made of Iroko wood, the priests placed white cloth beneath their feet, symbolizing unity and purity of their journey ahead. The drummers began to play a faster rhythm, and dancers in gold and white stepped into the courtyard. The talking drums echoed. The daughter of gold has found her king, not in riches, but in truth. Oduduwa sings today. Abeni's lips trembled with emotion. Tunde gently reached out, and their fingers intertwined, a silent promise that went deeper than gold. When the time came for the king to speak, the crowd quieted. King Adekunle rose, holding his staff of authority. The golden sun bathed his silver beard in light. "My people," he began, his deep voice rolling through the courtyard, "for many years I believed wealth was the highest measure of worth. I thought gold could guard my daughter's heart like a fortress. But this man, this Tunde Alibi, showed me something greater. He showed me that true worth is not in what we hold, but in what we give." He turned to the couple and smiled, a real smile, warm and full. "May love always outweigh gold. May your hearts remain your greatest treasure." The crowd erupted in applause. Even the chiefs who once mocked Tunde now bowed in respect. The celebration roared into the night. Royal dancers from across Africa took the stage. Zulu warriors stomped their feet to thunderous drums. Ashanti dancers swayed their golden cloth, and Igbo masquerades in feathered masks leaped and spun in the courtyard. It was as if the entire continent had gathered not just to witness a royal wedding, but to honor love itself. Fireworks lit up the night sky. Palm wine flowed like rivers. Suya and jollof rice filled every table, and musicians sang love songs that echoed into the stars. Abeni and Tunde danced in the center, surrounded by their people. Their steps were slow and gentle, perfectly in rhythm. Every beat of the drum matched the beating of their hearts. As they danced, Abeni whispered, "Do you remember the first day we met?" Tunde smiled. "You were trying to lift a basket that was too heavy. And you were wearing a shirt with a hole." She laughed softly. "I still have that shirt," he confessed. She looked up at him, her eyes sparkling beneath the lantern light. "Then never throw it away." It's where everything began. Later that night, the king watched them from his throne. Queen Yetunde leaned close to him and whispered, "You look proud." "I am," he replied quietly, "not because he's rich, but because he loved her before I ever valued what love meant." She touched his hand. "You've changed, my king." He exhaled, smiling faintly. "Wealth can build palaces, but only love can build a home." As the moon reached its peak, the priests completed the final blessing. The couple stood beneath the great baobab tree, the oldest tree in the kingdom. Tradition said that every royal marriage must be blessed under its branches. "May your union be as deep-rooted as this tree," the head priest chanted. "May your love outlive gold. May your names be sung in joy, not sorrow." Tunda and Abeni touched the trunk together, a symbol of their bond. The people cheered, the drums roared, and the stars above seemed to shine brighter. By dawn, the golden palace no longer felt like the fortress that once caged the princess. It felt like a home where stories were reborn. Abeni and Tunde stood on the palace balcony as the first light of morning broke through the horizon. Below them, dancers still celebrated, though many had grown tired. Children slept curled up on mats, their faces lit by the soft glow of lanterns. The talking drums continued, softer now, like a heartbeat winding down after a joyous race. Tunde wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Are you ready for the journey ahead?" Abeni leaned into him. "As long as you're by my side, I fear nothing." He kissed her forehead gently, the breeze lifting her veil. "Then let's build something greater than gold." And so, in the kingdom where wealth once decided fate, love rewrote the story. The princess who chose love over gold and the man who loved her before revealing his crown became a legend. Their story was told in market squares and palaces, whispered to children beneath moonlit skies. Generations later, bards would begin the tale the same way. Once upon a time in the golden land of Oduduwa, a princess married a man everyone thought was poor. But he was richer than gold in the only way that mattered.